Before we start, I'd like to quickly review some housekeeping details to ensure this virtual forum is as accessible as possible. Please click the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen to enable interpretation. You may have to click ... more if you are logged on through a mobile device. Next, please select either English or Spanish. And lastly, it is recommended that you mute the original audio. An ALS interpreter should always be visible on your screen. For CART, to see the closed captioning, please click the ... more button and click on Show Subtitle. So let's begin. We are pleased to speak to candidate Geoff Diehl today for the first of two disability-focused virtual gubernatorial forums. My name is Jossie Burks Abbott. I am an autism self-advocate and author. I am a man with dark hair and glasses, and my background displays the logos of all the sponsoring agencies. I currently serve on the Massachusetts Developmental Disabilities Council, where I chair the policy subcommittee and am on the faculty of the LEND program at Boston Children's Hospital. So it is with great interest that I open today's forum. Important to note that the 2022 Massachusetts gubernatorial election will take place on November 8th, when we will elect the governor of Massachusetts. Republican former state representative Geoff Diehl and Democratic State Attorney General Maura Healey are seeking to succeed incumbent Republican Governor Charlie Baker, who was not seeking re-election after 2 terms. This event has been organized by the Advocates for Autism of Massachusetts, the Boston Center for Independent Living, the Disability Law Center, Massachusetts Advocates Standing Strong, the Massachusetts Developmental Disabilities Council, and the ARC of Massachusetts. We'd also like to thank the many co-sponsors for their help in making this forum possible, and Mr. Diehl for taking the time to meet with us today. The general election is Tuesday, November 8th, and on this slide are resources to learn more about election and voting. It's important to announce that since we received many questions in advance, most questions will be from there. However, you can submit questions through the Q&A feature, which will be considered at the moderator's discretion. Additionally, you can always follow up with questions that may not be addressed during today's forum. Please contact the organizers of this forum, specifically those listed on the slide, if you have any further questions. Additionally, the Secretary of State's website has an easy-to-follow election information page where you can find out how to register to vote and everything else you need to know about the election process. And this slide shows additional resources about voting access. I am pleased to introduce you to Diana who will moderate questions and explain today's rules of order. Diana is now a software engineer at Google, chairperson of the Boston Center for Independent Living, and board member of the Riders Transportation Access Group. Diana, I now turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Jossie, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. I'm Diana Koo, chairperson of the Boston Center for Independent Living, and your moderator for this afternoon. I'm an Asian American woman sitting atop my motorized wheelchair and wearing a black short sleeve shirt with a black flower collar. My background is the same as Jossie's. It shows the logos of all the sponsoring organizations that have made this event possible. So welcome everyone to today's edition of the Virtual Disability Forum Series, Conversations with Candidates for Governor of Massachusetts. This is a great opportunity to have a dialogue with our gubernatorial candidates and get their thoughts and perspectives on some of the most critical issues that people with disabilities are facing in the present day. Understanding our leaders is a key step to voting for our leaders, to supporting them so that they can support us and our needs as part of the disability community. And today we're excited to have with us Geoff Diehl, the Republican nominee for governor of Massachusetts. We'll begin the event with Mr. Diehl's opening remarks, and then we'll move to a Q&A session. And finally, we'll end with Mr. Diehl's closing remarks. Please also note that we're recording this event for folks who are not able to attend or who would like to rewatch or tune in later. A lot of thoughtful questions were submitted in advance, with topics ranging from healthcare to education to employment to transportation to housing to accessibility and beyond. So we'll begin our Q&A session with some of these questions. And if you think of a question that you'd like to ask Mr. Diehl, please feel free to use that Zoom Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions, and we'll try to get to them as time allows. But before we get to Q&A, a bit of background on our candidate with us today. Mr. Diehl has a long history in Massachusetts government, representing the 7th Plymouth District in the Massachusetts House of Representatives from 2011 to 2019. He strived for more transparency and more accountability at the State House, for more jobs and more local aid to cities and towns, and for protecting residents from tax hikes, notably including a gas tax hike in 2014. Mr. Diehl also secured the Massachusetts Republican nomination for the US Senate in 2018. And this year, of course, he is the Republican nominee for the upcoming governor election. We're grateful to Mr. Diehl for taking the time and the consideration to be with us here today. Mr. Diehl, the floor is yours for your opening remarks.
Well, first of all, thank you, Diana, for the introduction and for setting the stage. And Jossie, thank you as well for being able to set this all up and hosting me for the Boston Center for Independent Living. This is a fantastic forum. I'm a Caucasian male wearing a dark blue suit with a yellow tie. Hopefully that helps describe me somewhat. But I'm also a father of 2 daughters. One is 20 years old in college. The other one is 16 years old in high school. My wife and I own a performing arts school on the South Shore in the town of Hanson. We live in the neighboring town of Whitman. And I served in the legislature, as you mentioned, winning an election in 2010. I was 40 years old, had never run for office before. In fact, never been involved in politics before. I was serving on the Whitman Finance Committee. I was the liaison to our regional high school system. And one of the reasons I decided to run for office was to try to advocate for increased support for education, as well as try to make sure that Beacon Hill understood that some of the mandates that were not funded were not necessarily helping our towns economically. So those were some of the initial reasons I ran. But once I was fortunate enough to serve in office, and by the way, we are joined on this, I can see, by Barbara L'Italian, who served with me in the legislature as well. And I just want to say that during my time in the state legislature, I was able to be on the Ways and Means Committee, which was much like my local town's finance committee, only a lot more zeros at the end of the budget for each line item. But what I learned there was where the state spends the majority of its money and where we have great successes, and obviously areas where we have room for improvement. So my time in office for 8 years was spent trying to make sure that we had that transparency with what the state was providing. And we also made sure that we were, my goal was to make sure that we were achieving the needs of the people of Massachusetts in many ways. I've been very fortunate to have been able to attend a lot of events in the South Shore area where I live. The Brockton area ARC invited me to and allowed me to participate in many advocacy events to learn about what they're doing. The Higashi School in Randolph, I have people I know whose children attend there. And of course, Independence Associates, which used to be located in Brockton, is now in East Bridgewater, is housed in one of the towns that I actually used to represent as state representative. So I've always done my best to familiarize myself with the services being provided with independent living and I will admit right off the bat that I'm not an expert in the field, and certainly hope that the relationship that we have, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, is one that you will always feel that you can come to me and advocate completely for what you think is the best interest of the people that you serve. And I will certainly make sure that I can do the best that we can as a state and myself to fulfill those needs. I did mention that my wife and I own a performing arts school in the town of Hanson. One of the things that my wife prides herself on is making sure that children of all backgrounds can participate in the dancing, acting, and voice classes that are offered. And that includes people with physical limitations. That includes people with autism. We absolutely feel that everyone deserves and should, and we benefit from having their participation in a performing arts environment. And so I can tell you that I'm very excited and proud to be able to be part of this forum. And I really appreciate you taking the time and effort to make this possible.
Thank you so much, Mr. Diehl, and really strongly resonating with your empathy and with your support for independent living and full participation and inclusion in the community. Now let's move on to our Q&A session with our first question submitted in advance of today's event. There's an often cited statistic that people with disabilities are about 20% of the national population. And when we're talking about disabilities, we're including people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, mental health conditions, physical disabilities, chronic health conditions, sensory disabilities like blindness and deafness, and autism, among many, many others, with disabilities spanning all age groups from children to adults to seniors. And yeah, you touched on this in your opening remarks, but just want to understand more about your personal connection or awareness or understanding of some of the issues that are faced by the disability community.
So I understand, obviously, that from an early age, there is, intervention that the state is able to provide in assistance with children who have maybe special needs, with health issues following birth. Obviously, educational, the individual support plans that schools provide for children obviously is something that, the local school districts try to provide, and obviously the state tries to help augment as well. Obviously, mobility is a huge issue. I live in a suburban town where there's very limited mobility options for people. In fact, we have very limited sidewalks in the town of Hanson, where my wife's performing arts school is. So it's something that I think the state certainly has to continue to be aware of and look towards investments that just don't spring to mind immediately when you're thinking of just typical transportation needs, because and by the way, I shouldn't cut the list short. It's not just education, but making sure that transitional services, by the time people turn 22, those are in place. Again, workforce training for people who are able to, find a career that fulfills them and what their abilities allow. That's something that I know we as a state and local agencies that are funded by the state and federal programs are able to provide. So when you say that it's 20% of the population, really, it doesn't matter that it's 20%, because we're all unique individuals in our own right. And ultimately, I think it's incumbent on state government and local government and federal government, of course, to provide that American dream and that ability to enjoy your life to your fullest in every way possible. And so I think Massachusetts has been fortunate to be a state that has the resources to be able to provide a lot of those services. And yet at the same time, I think there are areas that are overlooked that perhaps I'm unaware of, or maybe we just haven't been able to achieve yet. And again, that's where I hope that everybody on this conference and anybody that, for the future that wants to approach me, lets me know where we're dropping the ball, so to speak. But no, I do appreciate your comment, and that is that we should never overlook any single person when it comes to what we can do to help them live that fulfilling life in every way possible.
Thanks, Mr. Diehl, a great answer. And I want to sort of dive a bit into an education component. And the question is, how will you work to ensure that Massachusetts schools drop the practice of segregated classrooms for students with disabilities and instead move to a more inclusive education for all, especially in urban school districts, but also beyond?
Right. So I forgot to mention this before. Both my sister-in-law and brother-in-law on my wife's side are special needs teachers. One is in Canton and the other one's in Quincy. And so they both, certainly whenever we talk as a family, relay to me the importance of making sure that we have integrated classrooms where the children are fully participating, at whatever level of performance they have. It doesn't matter. It's important to make sure that those social components are in place as well. And so it's a challenge, and I don't agree with the practice of segregation within the classroom. And I do think that, again, everyone benefits, just like my wife's performing arts school. Everyone benefits from the unique aspects of each person's participation, regardless of achievement level.
Yeah. Strong agreement. And you also mentioned before about students who are sort of transitioning to adult services when they turn 22 years old. And this is a really pivotal moment for many students with disabilities because they need to transition away from an educational system that's, for the majority of their lives, provided the services and supports that they've needed to live and to thrive in the community. And so the question is, how would you work toward ensuring a successful transition for all students with disabilities who are turning 22 and are in need of adult services?
Yeah, and again, that's where I think we as a state have a great network of people. The ARC of Massachusetts, Independence Associates down where I live, always made sure that they were known as a resource to go to if somebody had questions about what type of services that could be provided, whether it's finding the housing, finding the transportation, looking for those employment opportunities regionally for people, the recreational activities that were available for people. There's Shine officers that help out in senior centers. They connect people who are seniors with the services that are available to them. And I think one of the things that I found is that we have a strong network. Although again, I'm going to continue to say this, if you find that there are areas where there are gaps in those agencies that can help provide the connections to people in the services or resources they're looking for, please let me know, and we can try to make sure we fulfill those gaps. But been very lucky again to have a region of the state where I know that there is a pretty strong awareness of and financial support of agencies that are able to connect people to those turning 22 programs that help transition them away from the educational setting where, like you say, there are a lot of services provided, and now they start to get more piecemeal. You kind of have to, it's not all in one type of service. So it becomes a little bit more challenging there.
I think I think when these programs are working well, I think they're doing a great job. But yeah, there have been some gaps noted, particularly during the pandemic time, when many people with disabilities have not been able to access certain programs that have been helpful for community integration. And one example there is from the Department of Developmental Services, or DDS, and their day programs. A lot of people with disabilities have been sort of shut out from these DDS day programs because of limited staffing for the programs and transportation. And so with few opportunities for community integration, folks are not getting the access that they need and can even end up in the emergency room because of lack of access and support. So the question would be, what would you do as governor to sort of address the staffing shortages that are leading to lack of access or gaps within the DDS day programs?
Right. So thank you, Diana. A great follow-up question. And so I think that the big problem the state has had for a while now, and the COVID pandemic certainly caused major problems across the entire state, was employment. We still have underemployment within the private sector. We have underemployment within state agencies. The MBTA is one example where the federal government has had to intervene because of safety issues, because we have reduced staffing. I think that there was a problem where the vaccine mandates, some people did not want to get vaccinated, were either fired or they took early retirements, which has left us shorthanded in a lot of state agencies as well. And then on top of that, immigrants coming into our state who are able to work on visas were not able to travel during the pandemic and come in. So areas like the Cape and Islands, which rely on a lot of transitional workforce throughout the summer months, for example, were also unable to get people to work in those different jobs. But really, again, where it affects people with independent living and the support that services that are provided, I think the similar situation, we've seen affordability issues in Massachusetts drive 50,000 people out of our state. We've got to make sure, and we just saw that last Friday there was a report that electricity rates are going to increase by 64%. It's harder and harder to be able to afford to live in Massachusetts. I want to try to figure out ways to help people afford to live here, and that way we will have the residents, the citizens available to be part of the workforce for the future. So it's not an overnight quick fix solution to try to get people back into the workforce, but I think that it's something we have to look at as a major priority right now. Again, we're seeing a trend of businesses leaving the state because they don't have the ability to find the workers right now. Some of that is workforce alignment. Kids are not necessarily getting trained in the careers that allow them to go right into certain fields. I do think that in the case of healthcare, for example, I'd like to incentivize people. When I was in the state legislature, Western Massachusetts was having a shortage of people, doctors and dentists, I believe, out in Western Massachusetts. It was a very sparse population. They couldn't make a lucrative enough career to pay back the loans that they had gone to medical school for. And so the state was able to incentivize them to move out and relocate for a certain period of time to Western Massachusetts. I'd like to do something similar where if we are shorthanded in the area of healthcare, and in this case with the day programs, perhaps there's a way we can incentivize people to get into that workforce faster right out of high school or maybe community colleges and get them working right away to shore up those gaps.
Yeah, I think that's a great initiative because there is a crisis level sort of shortage of staff for direct service workers, for personal care attendants, for clinical staff. I think it's really important to prioritize supporting wages and benefits and recruitment in the healthcare field. So that's really great to hear. Yeah. And in your response, you also mentioned making Massachusetts sort of more affordable to live in. And I think housing is a really large aspect of affordable living. And it's pretty much universally known that there's acute shortage of affordable housing in the state. And this is really impacting people with disabilities. Many are living in unstable situations and in nursing homes, in inaccessible apartments, on friends' couches, in shelters with elderly parents. So what kind of specific actions would your administration propose to address that need for more affordable, more accessible, and integrated housing for people with disabilities?
So I know we're being hosted by the Boston Center for, Independent Living, BCIL, but I also think that we have to look beyond the capital city and think about areas of the state where we have more affordable construction opportunities to create larger spaces, to create the handicapped accessible buildings and requirements. And so part of that involves infrastructure investments as well, not just looking at making sure the MBTA is running safely and on time, but also making sure that things like East-West Rail or South Coast Rail are expanded so that we can allow people to live beyond Boston, where maybe there is the more affordable housing options, but also that means investing in some of the infrastructure beyond just those transportational avenues. So I know that Governor Baker, for example, has proposed to about 175 cities and towns requirements that they increase affordable housing units near transportation hubs. One of the criticisms I have with that plan is that it doesn't include the support beyond just the construction of the housing units. I think that the state needs also to make sure that things like, and it sounds mundane, but things like sidewalks and buses, like, again, down in my suburban area, we don't have the ride. We don't have the Brockton, the nearest city, has buses with handicapped accessibility, but we don't have that in some of the suburban towns where it is more affordable to build and live in. So I'd like to really open up the expansion of housing opportunities in areas beyond Boston. Now, where Boston, people want to remain with family and stay in the Boston area, this continued expansion of office buildings, taking over more and more of the land in the area, of course, drives up the overall gentrification, because high-paying jobs, of course, those people can afford more expensive apartments. And so even in South Boston, in Southie, the triple-decker, where the police officers used to live affordably, now one floor of those triple-deckers goes for $1 million. Who can move into that? Nobody. And so again, when the state can and does provide the assisted, economically assisted apartments and buildings for people to get in, I think that we can do more. I'm going to rely on experts to tell me where those opportunities exist, but I'm all for doing that. Again, we as a state we have $6 billion in excess tax revenue this year. This is not the first year we've had excess tax revenue in our state. I think it's time that we start looking towards making sure our core services are available to those who need it, who fall into, I think you had said the 20% that perhaps are overlooked when it comes to mobility, when it comes to, getting people to and from jobs that fit their abilities. We certainly can afford to do that. We just have to have the political will to do so.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like, yes, working with BCIL sounds excellent, and also working with other sort of sponsoring organizations like the Disability Law Center and the ARC. These organizations are statewide, and we can really expand our reach that way. And I also feel like transportation, it sounds like from your answer, is really a big part of affordability, and like expanding transportation can be good at a universal level, but in particular for people with disabilities, there are a lot of transportation challenges, whether it involves the Human Services Transportation Office, accessibility on the MBTA, including the RIDE paratransit service, or adequate funding for regional transit authorities. I also I grew up in the suburbs of Long Island, and yeah, I recognize that the transportation there was pretty terrible for someone in a motorized wheelchair. Trying to get to a convenience store was more than inconvenient. And so when I came to the Boston area and I saw the T, it was pretty amazing to be able to push an elevator button and board a subway car all on my own. I think that's the truth. Yeah.
Well, Diana, the other thing I just want to mention too is my wife and I met in New York City And we lived there for about 5 years without a car of our own. Public transportation there was fantastic, buses, subways. But what I've learned, in Massachusetts is, again, having things like the ride. And actually what the ride has done, which I think is very smart, is partnered with services like Uber and Lyft to allow those vehicles which have more capacity to handle specifically wheelchair, putting a wheelchair in, and they have more time and capacity to help people with those extra transportation nuances in the suburban areas. So I think partnering with, if the state isn't able to expand directly immediately, partnering with private groups that can provide some of those transportation solutions. I know I may sound like a broken record with transportation, but you have to be able to get to and from your house, to get to your work, to get to your school. Not everything can be home provided into the home right now. So, and it shouldn't always be. I think it's good for people to be able to get themselves out and about and see the rest of the city, the town, the state, and wherever they can. So yeah, I'm a big advocate for trying to make sure that people can get where they want to go and do it in a way that's available for any mode that's needed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think mentioning partnering with Uber and Lyft and expanding that on the ride as one positive way to increase accessibility. And what are some other examples, or what are some other things you might propose for improving transportation on the fixed route or otherwise for people with disabilities?
Yeah, down on the South Shore, there are some private, services that have been able to augment public school bus limitations. And so again, there are some of those public-private partnerships that I think can fill the gap where I live. But again, when it comes to larger cities like Boston, I'm not necessarily sure how we can achieve some of that, perhaps some of the same type of solutions. But again, I'm going to have to defer on this one to more experts that know Boston a little bit better than I do.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I want to pivot to another question submitted in advance. This is on the state's personal care attendant program, or their PCA program, which provides services to over 40,000 people with disabilities, including both physical and intellectual disabilities. Also many seniors. There are about 55,000 PCAs in this program, predominantly low-income women, immigrants, and members of the BIPOC communities. There's a unfortunate historical precedent where, upon taking office, many previous administrations, even going back to the 1990s, have targeted this program for cuts, not realizing that it's one of the most vital independent living programs in the state, and also an important source of income for low-income people. And on a personal level, MassHealth's PCA program is one of the main reasons why I've decided to call Massachusetts my home. My PCAs get me out of bed in the morning and assist me with all my activities of daily living so that I can lead an independent life. So the question is, can we count on your administration to support the PCA program and work closely with advocates and labor representatives to strengthen rather than reduce the program?
Yes, I hope to be the administration, I guess, that changes that trend by new incoming administrations. Again, serving on the Ways and Means Committee, I had a very fortunate opportunity for 4 years to be able to learn about transitional services, to learn about services for, like you mentioned, DDS, just things that I was completely unaware of before I became a legislator. At 40 years old, I just hadn't been faced with it myself necessarily. But it was a good opportunity to learn that the investments we make that attracted you specifically, Diana, to Massachusetts, and that keep people here rather than leaving is a valuable investment. We are as good as every person in our state, and I think every person in our state has some level of contribution that we have to be, that we should be proud of. And so I want to make sure that nobody wants to leave Massachusetts for any reason whatsoever. And the people that are working in home health care, you know, the personal care assistants or attendants, we want to make sure that the compensation they receive is fair and equitable. You know, my wife is in a union. My mother was a union worker for 40 years. As I mentioned earlier, my sister and brother-in-law, teachers in the MTA. I certainly believe in making sure that those union workforces are bargained with fairly, and that the compensation they receive is equitable compared, you know, in relation to the services they're providing. So you're not going to be looking at me as someone who wants to cut these incredibly valuable services or the number of people providing those services.
Thank you, Mr. Diehl. That is really comforting and promising to hear, that there are so many ways to support and strengthen the PCA program, and that you would work toward that goal. And I also sort of want to come back to supporting our direct service workers, because there is this shortage of staff that's leading to a crisis. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about ways to support the funding, ways to support the wages and benefits for these workers, and also for workers with disabilities, how to support people with disabilities in the workforce in both the public and private sectors.
Right. So one of the statistics I saw with the Boston Center for Independent Living was that I believe 70% of the staff is actually people who have disabilities of some form, which is very impressive. And again, a model for how we can maybe have staffing increases in other parts of our state agencies. So again, when it comes to you know, wages, I certainly want to make sure that we're paying fairly for the services out there. When it comes to you know, other bonuses, I'm not necessarily sure. You know, I know that just recently I heard that the governor has implemented a new out-of-state overseer of time off, paid time off, work partners. And there's some concerns by a lot of state agencies as to having a third-party private entity taking over the HR responsibilities of state workers. And so I think that's something that I'm going to investigate fairly. I think the contract just took place, and I'm not necessarily thrilled with that whole idea that somebody working in Massachusetts for a state agency or as in support of a state agency would have their direct supervisor no longer able to give them that immediate approval for the time off that they would need right away if there was a family emergency. That it just seems to be a bad decision, and I'd like to learn more before I move away from it. But I do feel that that's something that we should restore back to state agencies, more control over their the workforce time off that's needed, whether it's paid family medical leave, PFML, or sick time. So those are just things that I can think off the top of my head. I'm, again, not necessarily sure what other incentivization beyond perhaps educational incentive, you know, in educational cost incentives we can provide to get people into certain workforce fields that are understaffed, which I think I'd mentioned earlier. But again, if you have any other ideas that you think would help make a happier and a stronger workforce, I'm always going to be all ears.
That's great. Yeah, and I think when it comes to initiatives to hire people with disabilities, I wonder if it would make sense to sort of establish some quantitative or concrete goals for hiring people who identify with having a disability, and sort of holding state agencies to maybe establish metrics surrounding those goals, if that would be a possibility with your leadership as governor.
That makes sense. Right now, the state police, I just met with the state police union yesterday, and they were talking about how there's sort of a, I'm not going to say, I can't think of the term. It's not deputy, but sort of a, I think it's about 50,000 people that are being brought in right out of high school to start training to potentially be state police officers. It's the first time they're doing it. They don't have the ability to, carry a gun or make arrests or anything like that, but they're going to be brought in to handle some support roles within the state police operations that while they sort of train and learn more about the job and then go on to either take the exam and become fully brought in as a state police trooper down the road. But I guess my point is more not about state police itself, but as the model of being able to bring in a percentage of people that are able to fulfill, again, support roles and maybe then train and learn in areas that we find that it's a great match that there's an opening for. So yeah, I again, we're in a unique situation where the pandemic has caused us to be understaffed in so many state agencies that I think this is the perfect time to roll out that opportunity to get more people with disabilities a trial run in certain careers.
That's great to hear. Yeah, yeah. I want to move to another question, which became extremely relevant also during the pandemic. And during the pandemic, remote access to public meetings became a necessary response, and it went beyond preserving public bodies' ability to operate. It really opened the door to civic engagement for members of the public who had been previously shut out, including people with disabilities. And taking away remote participation would really shut out people who have for the first time been able to engage with their government in a new way without hindrance. And just wondering, with your leadership as governor, will you support remote participation in public meetings to really support keeping the door open on democracy?
Well, again, Diana, great question from you and from whoever the people who are giving you the questions. Thank you for these thoughtful things. This is something that actually is really exciting. And I think one of the silver linings from the pandemic was the fact that people became much more comfortable with the technology that allows us to do remote meetings like this. And my wife and I, when schools in 2021 were going back to, kids were going back to schools, but only 2 days a week, and then they would be home remotely for 3 days. My wife and I created a learning pod at our studio. We took the big dance rooms and created, the spacing needed, the 6-foot tables, and kids were at the end of each. And so they were there for the school day. We helped them get online, and we helped them access the programs for their classes. We saw that there were certain teachers that had a comfort level with the technology that was great. We saw teachers that didn't necessarily know what they were doing with the online remote learning. We saw kids that adapted to it very well. And we saw kids that, just wanted to watch a video on their computer instead of being the virtual classroom. But the general point is this: I think people became aware that it is possible to use this technology as a way to engage in a way that we hadn't really done in such numbers before. I also know that whenever we had hearings at the State House, the State House itself is sort of a very old building, kind of like working in a museum. And some of the access in the Gardner Auditorium or even in the hearing rooms in the basement were very difficult for people with disabilities to always be able to get in there. And it just was very hard. Sometimes just limited number of people in the room made it hard for people to get in there for those hearings. And so I think what we can do is open up legislative hearings. Hopefully the legislature would be open to this idea of having more engagement by having those hearings be more interactive. I know that they broadcast those hearings in some cases, but it would also be good if they allowed the interaction that we're seeing today, the Q&A, to take place as well. So I think the technology is there. I think it's, again, more a matter of the will. And I certainly am someone who, as you mentioned at the outset, believes in transparency. And so the more people know, the better government we're going to get.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a boon for transparency. And yeah, definitely beyond just listening in, being able to have a bi-directional sort of communication through remote means and virtual access. I think that's a strong plus in favor of sort of a hybrid meeting model. Yeah. And I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. I want to go to a question on self-direction. This is a model of long-term service delivery that empowers people with disabilities to take control over the what, the when, and the how they receive services and supports. And many folks in the disability community consider self-direction a matter of human rights and fundamental to independent living. And how will you support self-direction for people with disabilities?
I suppose that's a tough question for me to answer, just because, again, I'm not necessarily sure in exactly what form that takes. Although I would say, as you mentioned, if it's legal assistance that the state can provide to someone who feels that they're not having the ability to self-direct, then certainly that's something that we want to make sure that we connect those people to the legal services they should get. I don't know if it's an education component that needs to be put out there so that people in the community beyond families are aware that people who want to self-direct their lives, should be allowed to, So again, I'm going to apologize now and say that I probably need to learn a little bit more about how I can support that, but I can't imagine there would be any way that my administration wouldn't want to make sure that that's a direction people can certainly take.
Thank you, Mr. Diehl. And I think we're sort of coming closer to the end of our event. And I know we received over a dozen questions in live from the Q&A. Well, we'll definitely share them after today's event with you, and really want to respect the questions that folks have submitted. But I just want to give an opportunity to thank you, Mr. Diehl, for your really thoughtful and well recent responses in this Q&A session, sort of taking a deep dive into how Massachusetts can better support and empower its residents with disabilities, and how you would support the cause as our next governor. So I'd like to hand the virtual spotlight back to you once more for your closing remarks, and then we'll finish off the event. So the floor is yours, Mr. Diehl.
Well, thanks again, Diana. And that dive is probably not deep enough. One thing that I did when I was a state legislator was to go meet with the people that I was voting on bills that affected their livelihoods, whether it was lobstermen or cranberry growers, or it was law enforcement officers. I did ride-alongs with police officers to see what was going on. I think what I need to do in this case is hopefully spend some time with you and advocates that can show me specifically where the rubber hits the road as far as where the administration and the state can make the best impact with the resources that you're asking for. And that way I can speak obviously with more authority by the time I'm in office and have a chance to make an impact over the next 4 years if I'm fortunate enough to win. I am fortunate to have also a running mate named Leah Allen, who at the time when she served in office, her name was Leah Cole. She served with me in this House of Representatives, and she went back to a career as a nurse. She has 2 children. Her husband is a mechanic in the Local 4 Elevators Union. And she is someone who is very passionate about trying to make sure that the hardworking folks of Massachusetts get the services from the state that they expect, and get it with that transparency that we all believe gives us the best opportunity to succeed individually and as a state as a whole. And so I hope that as people, when they're done with this session that we're having today, if they want to learn more, we do have a website. It goes by deahlallen.com, www.deahlallen.com. If they can go to that website, we do have it in Spanish as well as in English. And people can learn more. There's videos there. If you are able to get onto the videos, you can hear us talk about our policy positions and what we'd like to do for the state. So again, I can't thank you enough, Diana, for the forum and for everybody who's participated in this and for the questions that were posed. But please know that this is a continuing discussion that we'll have, whether I get into office or not in November. My goal is to continue to be an advocate for the programs and the services that this state does and does well. And, you know, I'm an Eagle Scout. You've got to leave the campground better than you found it. Do a good turn daily. These are some of the things that you're sort of told as a young kid, and it's drilled into your head. And so I'm just very fortunate to live in a state that, again, really does, I think, provide some of the best services, but there's always room for improvement. And I'm here to make sure that that we take care of those improvements whenever possible.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Diehl. And yeah, I really feel like the disability issues that we're talking about today, they're sort of often treated as sort of separate sorts of topics, even though we really saw from our discussion that they're crossing all policy areas. And I think it's so important to integrate them, disability issues into all sorts of policy discussions, whether it's housing or transportation or economic opportunity or equity and beyond. So I think this has been a really informative discussion, and I really want to thank you for taking the time to virtually sit down with us today and share your thoughts and perspectives, and really a vision for how Massachusetts would look for people with disabilities under your leadership as governor. And I also want to take the time to thank the support of all of the sponsoring organizations. Want to thank our interpreters, our Spanish interpreter, our ASL interpreters, and our CART person, and just really making this event possible and giving a lot of information for what the governor would do from November 8th and onward. And for everyone in the office, I really hope this event gives you more insight into Mr. Diehl's thinking and policies when it comes to supporting disability rights and services. So this is really part of a larger call to action to get ready to vote for your governor on November 8th. Our organizations are nonpartisan, but we urge that the voice of the disabled be heard in the policies of our great state and beyond. And as the renowned disability rights activist Justin Dart once said, vote as if your life depends on it, because it does. So thank you everyone for attending. This is the end of our event.